Okay, here's a good one for you. What if I told you about a super smart, MIT-trained economist who ran a business delivering bagels, but somehow he made one of the most basic mistakes in the entire field of economics? It's a fantastic story, and it reveals this powerful truth about how we all make decisions, both the good ones and the really, really bad ones.
So our guide for this whole thing is a fascinating academic paper by the economist Stephen Levitt. He found this business that was, well, it was almost like a perfect real-world laboratory for testing economic theory. And the question was pretty simple. Would a highly trained economist actually run his own business the way the textbooks say you should?
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get to know the business itself. Then, we're going to see the part where our economist was an absolute genius. After that, though, we'll uncover a really puzzling and very expensive blind spot. We're going to get to the bottom of why he was so brilliant at one thing and so flawed at another. And then finally, we'll pull it all together and see the big lesson this one little story teaches us about making decisions.
So let's set the scene. What was it about this simple bagel business that made it such a dream come true for a social scientist?
Okay, so here's the setup. The owner, an economist with his graduate training from MIT. So he knows his stuff. His business couldn't be more straightforward. He drops off bagels and donuts at offices, and people just pay on the honor system. Now, the amazing part is that he kept crazy detailed records. We're talking 13 years of data covering more than 80,000 deliveries. It's a goldmine. The conditions were just perfect for analysis. Simple costs, he got feedback on demand every single day, and since he was the owner and the guy making the calls, there was no funny business. Which brings us to our big question. Did he actually run this thing to perfectly maximize his profits? Let's start with the first huge decision he had to make, day in and day out. Exactly how many bagels should he leave at each office? This is where things get really, really interesting. Now, to really get what he was doing, we need to touch on this core idea in economics called marginal analysis. It sounds fancy, but it's not. It's just the art of weighing the costs and benefits of doing a little bit more or a little bit less of something, like, say, adding just one more bagel to the delivery box.
And this really just nails it. It's not about your average profit across all the bagels. It's about the profit you make on that very last one you decide to sell. If that last bagel makes you money, great decision. If it costs you more than you earn, you went one too far. Simple as that.
So how did our guy do? Well, check this out. This table shows the expected profit on the very last bagel he delivered, year after year. Now, a perfect optimizer wants this number to be as close to zero as possible. And just look at this data. I mean, sometimes it's a tiny bit positive, sometimes a tiny bit negative, but it is always, always hovering right around that break-even point. It's incredible. And this is the crucial number. When you average out the profit he made on that final marginal bagel over the entire 13-year period, it was just 1.1 cents. That is an absolutely insane level of precision. He was, for all intents and purposes, perfect.
So the verdict here is pretty clear, right? When it came to figuring out how many bagels to deliver each day, this economist was a true master. He fine-tuned his operation so well that he squeezed out every last penny of profit. Case closed, right? He's the perfect economic man? Well, not so fast.
And this is where we get to the real puzzle of the story. Because, you see, while he was a certified genius with quantity, his approach to the other huge decision, what price to charge, was a completely different story.
I mean, you'd think so, wouldn't you? If you can calculate the profit on a single bagel down to a fraction of a cent, setting the overall price should be a piece of cake. But, oh no, the data tells a very, very different story.
Just take a look at this timeline. Over 13 years, he only changed the price of bagels 3 times. In a period with steady inflation, that's kind of weird. His prices were what economists call sticky. He just seemed incredibly reluctant to change them.
And here, right here, is the smoking gun. Every single time he finally got around to raising the price, his total revenue and his total profit both went up. In economics, that is a giant, flashing neon sign. It screams that your customers aren't that sensitive to price, and you have been charging way, way too little this whole time. It's literally Econ 101.
So why would a brilliant economist make such a fundamental mistake? Well, according to him, it wasn't about the math. It was all about feelings and psychology. He was afraid that raising prices would tick off his customers and maybe even make them cheat the honor box. He also mentioned menu costs, the simple hassle of having to change all the little price signs. He just never seriously considered running an experiment to find the best price.
And the cost of this fear was enormous. Levitt's analysis, which is pretty conservative, suggests that by constantly underpricing his bagels, this economist gave up at least 30% of his potential profits. 30%! That is a staggering amount of money to just leave sitting on the table.
So this is the mystery we have to solve. We have a genius optimizer and a pretty flawed decision maker, all wrapped up in the same person. What could possibly explain that huge difference? Well, the answer comes down to one single, powerful idea.
This slide really gets to the absolute heart of it. Let's just compare the two decisions side by side. For the quantity decision, the feedback was perfect. Every single day, he knew exactly how many bagels were left. The results were immediate, they were crystal clear. But for the price decision, the feedback was terrible. He only changed prices once every few years, so the data was super infrequent. And when he did, it was impossible to tell if sales changed because of the price, or the time of year, or a million other things. The feedback was just ambiguous and noisy.
And that's the big reveal. This story isn't about how smart the economist was. It's not about his MIT training. It's a story about the environment he was working in. His success and his failure were determined almost entirely by the quality of the feedback loop he had for each decision.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? I mean, this isn't just a quirky little story about a bagel guy. It's a really powerful lesson about decision-making that applies to, well, to just about everything we do.
Here's the universal lesson. All of us, we tend to be brilliant optimizers in areas where we get constant, fast, and clear feedback. Think about a factory manager tweaking an assembly line or a programmer debugging code. But we all struggle in those areas where the feedback is slow, it's rare, and it's super confusing. Think about making huge career choices or long-term investments, or even figuring out if a big advertising campaign actually worked.
When you boil it all down, it comes to this simple but really profound truth. The quality of our decisions is almost never about how smart we are. It's a direct function of the quality of the feedback we get from the world around us.
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. When you look at your own work, your own life, what's the most important decision you have to make where you're basically flying blind, where the feedback is just slow and ambiguous and rare? Because figuring that out, well, that might just be the first step to avoiding your own 30% mistake.